Hello, everyone, and welcome to Latinas in Tech and Always hosting a joint seminar. My name is Carolina Waranca Mendoza. I'm a proud member of both these incredible organizations, and by day, I'm a venture capitalist. So this particular panel rings true to my heart. I'm sure that many of you are new to our organization, so I wanted to take just a few quick minutes to share a little bit more about who Latinas in Tech are. We're a nonprofit organization based here in Silicon Valley, and we were founded in 2014 by two incredible forces of nature, Rocio Van Yorp and Gretel Pereira. This organization now serves over 10,000 women across the world. We have branches in Mexico, in Canada, even in England. And our goal is to rebuild the tech industry to ensure that there are more Latinas who are well represented throughout the entire pipeline, from entry-level employee to C-level executive, and then ending up as potential tech entrepreneur. So I wanted, before we dive into our panel discussion, I wanted to couch that this conversation is geared toward entrepreneurship, particularly tech entrepreneurship that can be backed by venture capital funds. So these are very high growth companies that we're going to be talking about versus small businesses or solo entrepreneurship. So I wanted to couch that before I hand it off to our amazing moderator, Marion, who will kick it off with us. So bienvenidos, so excited to have you all today, and I'm passing over the mic.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carolina. Thank you, Latinas in Tech. Ana, it's such a pleasure to be able to work together with two such great organizations. So hello to everyone. I am Marion Araque. I work at Always and I run the digital events on this end. And it's such an honor to be in your presence and in partnership with Latinas in Tech. A little bit more about Always. We are a nonprofit. We started about 2 years ago, going into year 3, and we're really dedicated to amplifying female voices, accelerating female success, and creating a tech culture where women are leading, shaping, and funding the future. And so a lot of that is both working with founders and funders and trying to marry both of them so we can support everyone on the whole picture. So it's really great to be here and to share some nuggets about what it means to remotely pitch. But before we jump in, just a few housekeeping rules. I know many of you have been on a webinar before, but just a few reminders. Please make sure to drop in your questions into the Q&A box as they come up instead of the chat. I definitely want to be vigilant of that and make sure that we get all of your questions answered as we go throughout the session and into our Q&A. And without further ado, I want to introduce our two speakers today, Amanda and Lisa. If you two could please introduce yourselves, let us know a little bit about who you are, your name, company, and the stage of company that you've raised for, or if you're the investor, Lisa, the stage of companies that you invest in, and a little bit about what you do. And Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Amanda Doamaral. I am based in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin. I'm the founder and CEO of Fiveable, and we are building a social learning platform for high school students. Our company just raised a seed round over the summer/early fall, so we're definitely high growth and pre-Series A. So I've raised a pre-seed and a seed round, and then I've also done some accelerators too. But this seed round was all online.
Nice, thank you, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Lisa Cuesta. I'm an investor at NextGen Venture Partners. I've been part of the fund since Fund 1, so joined about 4.5 years ago. We're currently investing out of our second fund, focused on early stage, which in these days has a broad spectrum of companies, but I'd say like seed through pre-A. And we lead, co-lead, follow in those seed rounds. The thing that's differentiated about our approach is that in addition to our full-time investment team, we have a network of now 1,400 venture partners that are part-time affiliates of the fund. They all are full-time founders, operators, executives, but they spend a portion of their time with us, helping us evaluate companies, and most importantly, are a resource to our portfolio after we make an investment.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you both for joining us today. We're so excited to kind of walk through the journey of pitching virtually, especially in this new 2020 and definitely going into 2021. We're just excited to learn from the journeys both on the founder side and the investor side, as there's so much. And as we've seen from registration, we have a lot of founders who are early stage, trying to figure out what are those next steps. And so the way we've kind of want to break down today's session is kind of thinking about what does it look like first for the first pitch. So what everything that goes in prior to that, then walking through what does the first pitch look like and feel like, and then finally concluding with what does it look like post pitch? What does the follow-up due diligence need to look like there? So why don't we just jump right in and start with Amanda. So what did preparation look like for you as you were preparing your pitch deck for the first pitch presentation? And for example, did you talk to other startup founders to learn their process? What research did you do? What resources did you use to kind of prepare for that?
Yeah. So building a pitch deck is kind of an art and a science. So there's a lot about it that you are really trying to encapsulate, like the essence of what you're building and the vision of what you're doing. And especially in the earlier stages, like really getting across like what you've done already and where you're going and what you're going to do with the funds and who your team is. That those are some of the like most important pieces. But for me, I had the support of a couple of accelerators I did. There was a question about that I had answered, but Beta Boom was the first one that I had done, and then Generator was the second one. And so I really got like kind of a deck template from them. But I think the best thing you can do, like before you even pitch a real investor kind of thing, is practice. Like building your deck, it takes a lot of iterations and a lot of talking to your team members, talking to your customers to make sure the language that you're using is right. It's not that you're actually going to pitch to them, but even if you have someone that you can trust to do that with, and then really, leaning on folks that, even if they are investors, like reaching out to people who you can do like trial runs with, and really trying to get that like pitch down in timing and really making sure you're focusing on the best pieces of that.
Nice. And so you touched a little bit about fundraising here, Amanda, and I'd love for you to kind of dig in a little bit more. Can you share what was your investor research like? What did it entail? How did you know who to pitch to, and then thinking about like based on sector and stage, can you walk us through the process that you use to kind of build out your list of target investors?
Yeah, so for me, the most useful resources were like Crunchbase, Twitter even, and AngelList and LinkedIn. And so like kind of between all of those, even like TechCrunch too, like to kind of see the news. But ideally for me, I was trying to figure out who is investing in this stage. So I need to really know that, like, for me, that meant seed stage. So I want to find people who really have invested in seed stage companies. And I wanted to be able to see if they've invested recently. For me, that became two-part. One, like, were they actually making investments post-COVID? Because some people had a huge gap in that. And then the other part was, do they actually have funds to deploy? Because there are some great investors that may not have the funds in the moment. So making sure that I was pitching people who were actively looking to write checks in companies my size, and then also that they were open to education, which, knowing your sector is really important, because talking to investors, the best people, like, it's not just about the check that they're going to write you. It's about how much they understand the concept and the vision of what you're building. And so finding those people who really understood education and what I was doing. And so even if you just like look on Crunchbase for like similar companies to you, even they could be competitors. They don't have to be competitors, just like comparables, like something kind of similar in a similar stage, similar sector, and then trying to find those investors and just researching and culling a huge list as big as you can. Like, honestly, for me, I probably had upwards of like 100 different people or VCs on my like initial list. And then it sort of became a matter of me organizing that and, paring that down and picking the top people I really, really wanted, but really having that like good database to start with.
Nice. Thank you, Amanda, for walking us through. I think it's definitely the more people you can reach out to, the better. And then Lisa, from the investor point of view, is there anything else you would encourage founders to do as they refine their investor outreach list?
Yeah. So I think Amanda hit on a lot of really great points. First is practice. And that can be both to, your advisors, it could be to angel investors. But I'd say you definitely want to work out the kinks before you start talking to your dream list of investors. Which brings me to my second point. I think that there is a bit of segmentation that happens in the same way that you segment your customer lists. You might want to think about, your investor pipeline in a similar way. It is kind of a sales process. And so I would, think about all the investors, and if there are kind of like the dream investors, like tier one, have made investments in this space before, have taken these companies, to the next milestones, you don't want to pitch them first. Like, you want to think about working on the pitch and getting feedback and being able to like understand what questions they might have your answers prepared, and really just like practice before getting to that point. I think another thing is, you have this list of investors. You want to use publicly available information. So Amanda mentioned Crunchbase, TechCrunch, some others that you could consider is just like, what's the digital footprint that this investor is leaving online? A lot of us tweet, a lot of us post blogs. We, have our email listservs. So just collect as much data as you can on the investor before having the meeting, especially if it's one that you're really excited about. So you have some, touch points and things that you can talk about because you have done your homework and know kind of like what the latest investment they did was, or a thesis that they might be working on. And that will just help you refine the conversation, and then also your priorities in terms of who you're trying to get in front of. And then lastly, looking at their website. So just making sure that you understand how they present themselves, their investment thesis, their approach, maybe looking at their portfolio and seeing if there's any kind of commonalities. Maybe some of their portfolio companies could be customers of yours. Maybe they could be, complementary in some way. They could be distribution partners. As part of the diligence process, assuming it gets past the first step, the investor would naturally go to their portfolio and say, hey, I just saw this really interesting pitch. You could be a perfect customer. Like, what do you think of this? Would you actually use this? Would you pay for it? What do you see in the market that's like competitive with this or that's comparable? And that will, based on how that conversation goes, the investor might get more or less excited about the company.
Nice, thank you. So I'm definitely hearing a bit of a strategy there when you're trying to tackle who I should talk to and the research that goes into that. And going back to you, Amanda, so now you've done all your research, you've kind of compiled your list of ideal investors. When did you feel that you were ready to approach investors? For example, like how much traction did you have before even approaching your investors?
I don't know if I ever felt like ready is the best way to explain it. Like, I think a lot of times I had to kind of just like be at a stage higher than what I even maybe felt like. And I think a lot of women, particularly women of color, sometimes like hold themselves back because they're like trying to reach a certain level before they like put themselves out there. And for me, it was like, I guess like we were at a pretty good traction in terms of user growth and had just gone through a really high growth period in the end of the school year. And so one of the like strategies too can really be like planning out your raise to align with your business, right? Like there's going to be time if you're seasonal, or there's certain times when like you just kind of know like these are going to be some good milestones to hit. You can kind of plan around that. Like I know that our spring is the season for us. And so, summer tends to be like kind of a good time because we have better numbers. And so that can help. But I think the best thing you can do is you really have to think about, like, one of the questions in here too is even about like how much money to raise and how to know those things. You really have to think about like where you're at. And for seed, the general definition of seed would be like you have an idea and you're getting seed money to build it and prove it out. Of course, now seed seems like further ahead, but I think the reality is like you need to be able to to prove to your investors that this is something worth investing in, that you're onto something, right? And if only you had this capital to do these things in order to get to the next milestone, you'll prove that this is a billion-dollar business, that you can rule the world with this idea. And so I think you sort of have to figure out where in your timeline that makes sense for you. And it could be revenue, it could be user growth, it could be like key hires, it could be certain other like letters of intent, but it depends on what the metric is, depending on the business. But you sort of have to be able to you just need like those proof points. Like, why should the investor believe that you're the right person to do this, and that this is an idea worth building?
And to dig a little bit deeper, what were some of your proof points? Like, what did that look like? If I am, let's say I'm a founder in education, what are some of those milestones that help you get to that traction?
For us, it was definitely just like a sheer number of users on our site. We had gone through the spring and went from 50,000 users on our site in January to 850,000 in May. And like that kind of like rapid growth, that's what got a lot of heads turning. And one other thing I will say here is, and someone else had even mentioned this, like, how do I build the relationships with people? Even before you like are pitching, you're actually like actively raising, you can be building those relationships way earlier. You can have intros, and you want to keep people updated. Like, just, I have an email list every month that goes out that's like, here's how we're doing, here's what we've done, the highlights, the lowlights, the asks. And what I started noticing over the summer, because I hadn't originally intended to plan, like everybody else, 2020 plans went out the window. But after our May update went out, I started noticing that I was getting a lot of inbound requests from investors, and it seemed like that email had kind of gotten shipped around. And so for me, I knew I was at that point because of this. It was like signs from the investor market that it was ready for Fiveable, was like the best way I could describe it.
Nice. I hear a lot of newsletters and keeping investors up to date indirectly. I love that. And Lisa, like, what does traction look like for you, and how would you describe it? Like, what are the things you really look for, and how does it differ amongst sectors and stages?
Yeah, so I think momentum is a big thing, and Amanda spoke to this, where, if there's seasonality in your business and you just came off a really good sales cycle, or you just got a really marquee customer, or you hit some sort of like distribution partnership where you now unlocked this, access to new customers. Those key milestones really are how investors look at the opportunity, and just like the speed and pace of how your team moves. So like, how quickly is this stuff coming together? Are you guys getting points on the board? And then also, like, are you getting that pull from the market? So like, do customers actually want what you're building? Will they pay for it? And so I think that those things vary a lot depending on the industry that you're in. I'd say like, there are some industries or some sectors where investors are just like really excited about the market, think there's tons of room for many companies, think there's tons of room for many exit opportunities, and there's a lot of, money going into the space, and they might be willing to take a bet on a team that's going after a particular market. I'd say a lot of other industries don't have that luxury and require a bit more like proof points before you invest. And so I think, talking to other founders in your category will give you a good sense of like where how your category is being perceived by investors. And that can change based on macro events like COVID. So digital learning, for example, became like an amazing area to be in for investors, because all of a sudden everyone was an expert on like e-learning, and there were like now, millions of potential customers that weren't there a couple of months ago. And so it's a little bit, unfortunately, sometimes like out of your control, but a lot of that you can get a pulse on from other founders in your industry. So I think, thinking about like, what's the macro thing that's like really will accelerate your business, and like things like COVID, if you're operating in the like connected fitness space, like maybe this is the time to go fundraise because there's like an opportunity that's pretty obvious. I think that, looking at your industry and just generally like how it's been perceived by investors, or how investors have either made or lost money, might determine like how high the burden of proof is. So for example, like direct to consumer e-commerce was like really in favor and everyone was doing like Warby Parker for X 5+ years ago. Now, if you're doing direct to consumer, like the bar is a little bit higher because cost of acquisition has gone up, differentiation, defensibility has gone down. And so like the attractiveness of your particular industry ebbs and flows with the market dynamics, and getting a pulse on that requires, talking to other founders and talking to investors to really get a sense of like, what are the specific milestones they would be looking for in your company to get excited about it.
Got it. Got it. So I hear it's definitely, there's a little bit of luck with that timing piece and thinking about where you are and your industry and sector. And Lisa, do you think from your standpoint, is there such thing as pitching too early? This is something that many of our founders have top of mind and a question that came in, and would just love to hear your input on that.
I think that there is, it really depends on the team and the market that you're in. And so I was just speaking to this around like, certain areas, like particularly like really technical areas. So if you're operating in the machine learning space and you're coming out of Google and like you're solving a problem that you solved while you were at Google, that's a really compelling story for like a team market bet. So I'd say like there's certain pedigrees of teams that are able to like maybe raise without having that traction. But for the most part, I would say like most founders need to put points on the board in order to like raise a seed round. And that can look different depending on like what kind of industry that you're in. But the kind of key ingredients that I would think about that an investor is really evaluating is, one, what is like your key insight? So like, what is the problem that you're solving, the solution, and how is it different from everything out in the market? Like, why is it better, faster, cheaper, more convenient for your customer? And the second part is like, why are you the team to do it? And so Amanda spoke to this before, but like, ways that people prove that is either they have a really compelling founder market fit story where they've done this before, they've like had a unique insight from being the customer before, they have a really good pulse on the competitive landscape because they came from a certain company. Investors really just want to know, like, why will you win? Have you done it before? Have you, proven that your approach is so differentiated and proprietary? The third thing is, what evidence do you have to prove that you're right? So what signals are you getting that you have some indication of product market fit? And then lastly is like, why now? And that's a lot of the kind of market dynamics that I was talking about. And so if you can answer some of those key questions, then like maybe you're not too early if you have like really solid answers for all of those questions. But if you're still like, haven't launched your product, you have to have like a really high bar on either the story that you're telling or why you're the perfect founder in order to have that like evidence or the traction of like why you're right. And so it's a little bit founder dependent, but I think if you can answer those key questions, then you're in a pretty good spot to go out to market.
No, that's super helpful. I love how you called out those key ingredients. I think that's always important to have that clarity as a founder. And kind of going into, so now we've built ourselves up, kind of understanding what we should have ready. And Amanda, what would you say was your fundraising strategy as you got ready? How did you get your investors on the calls, and like warm intros versus cold intros? And what did that look like?
Yeah, so this kind of speaks to one of the conversations happening in the Q&A tab too. I don't know that the first time that you pitch when you're actively raising always has to be when the first time you meet them. For me, I mean, it can be more true for later stage, but for me, some of the people who did invest, it just took some time to really build that relationship. And so I think ultimately it was about finding people who could just really help us out and really like on my investor list, I had to find a way to them, right? Like, and I'm not someone who was like an insider. I was not from Silicon Valley. I did not work at Google. I did not go to Stanford, like very much out of the bubble.
Yes.
And so the way that I have kind of found my way in, the accelerators I did very much helped me do that, like 0 to 100 kind of thing. Like there were a lot of connections I made through them that I just would not have before. But the other thing is like, you sort of have to kind of balance, like you want people who will respond to your cold email. And that means really crafting a really good cold email that shows that like you've done the research, you're reaching out to the right person at the right time, and you're making the right ask. You're not creating more work for them. Like short and sweet, like to the point. You know, I'm sure there's templates we can share on this too. And don't be afraid to reach out to people, to Twitter DM people, to, you know, send. I wouldn't recommend LinkedIn as a cold outreach place because people don't read those as much, but email and Twitter DMs can work really well. But of course, like if you know a person, if you can get to one of them, one way that I've done that before is you can see who else they've invested in their portfolio companies. And so it's a whole lot easier to reach out to a company that might be similar to you, even if they're ahead, and say like, hey, I'm a founder in ed tech. I'd love to like meet for coffee or, you know, virtual coffee or whatever. And you kind of get to know them a little bit. And then you sort of like get an intro to that investor through the founder. So that's like one, like, it feels kind of sneaky, but it's really just about relationship building. And so that's like one way that you can kind of get to them. And then the other way is just like really trying to find those people who really are connectors and doing that with them, like being able to connect with them, because then I've found that any asks that I have now, I can kind of like get to the people I want. And so you sort of you got to do a balance. You got to find a path to each person. And so if you can get there through an intro, that's ideal. That's going to be a faster way. It's more likely for them to respond. But I think a lot of people, especially now, are very willing to respond to cold emails as well.
Nice. And Lisa, I'm just dying to hear your kind of thoughts on this. What is the mindset of you as an investor to get the meeting? What do you expect from the founder? Is it to send a deck ahead of time? What do what is it like on the other side?
So definitely agree on it's easier if you come in recommended. And I think that's just like human nature, right? Like if you are a friend of a friend, or you hear something really great about Amanda, you're just going to be more naturally positively inclined to either take the meeting, or if someone's like, Amanda's the best person I worked with during my time at X company, then like, yeah, that's great. Like I'm going to want to talk to that person because that's like a really great referral. It doesn't have to be that exceptional. It could also just be like, I met Amanda last week. We had a really great conversation. She's super thoughtful. Like, think you should take the meeting. So my point is like, if you can get a warm introduction, it's going to be better because the person is going to be more inclined to take the meeting, and then also just think more positively of you because it comes in through either, a portfolio company, maybe an angel investor that they've invested with before, or even just like a co-investor that they know. So, that's a little bit on the intro part. In terms of like a cold email, or even just like the email before the meeting, you'll want to include the deck just so that they're up to speed, because it's a better use of everyone's time, and they'll know where they want to spend their time based on like the stage of the company, or if it's not a good fit for them, then they'll give you your 15 minutes back or your 30 minutes back, and that's great because you want to go and spend your time elsewhere. So I'd say it's good to send the deck before and give them a sense of like where you are, what your unique insight or competitive advantage is. And then one thing I would take into consideration is DocSend, which is used by a lot of founders to manage and control who sees their materials. Did a study that showed how much time people actually spend on your deck before the meeting. And I've heard this consistently from founders. It is a de minimis amount of time. And so you really want to make sure that you're sending a deck that's easily consumable. You have to take into account that an investor sees literally thousands of decks per year. And in order for you to like get the meeting, they need to understand like, what are you doing? Why are you the team to do it? What have you proven so far? And like, why now? Those things I was talking about before in a short deck, like 10, maybe 12 slides that don't have too much content on it because people just are not going to read it. And so like work with someone that's done it before, get feedback from folks. But don't take it to heart if someone only spends 30 seconds or a minute on your deck. That's like totally normal and industry standard. And the point is of the deck to just put your best foot forward, have something that's really cleanly articulated, that, shows how you're thinking about it, that's not too overwhelming, just so that they can get a sense of like whether or not it's a fit for them and whether or not they should take the meeting.
Nice.
So,
and
as a side note, I'm kind of curious, like, have you seen any Notion docs sent to you, and do you like those or do you prefer the decks?
I've seen Notion docs. I would say that's a new phenomenon. I haven't seen a ton. It's mostly decks.
Do you have one that you prefer?
Not really. I mean, I think the Notion doc probably allows you to like be a little bit more thoughtful and like explain things.
Yeah.
It's fine either way.
Yeah.
Got it. And just curious, as I think about founders, like, are there any great resources where you guys, like off the top of your head, where founders can go look and see like great examples of like a clean, simple deck, the must-haves? I don't know if either of you have any recommendations there in thinking about resources.
I kind of started just like Googling like best pitch decks and looked at some of the like classic like Airbnb ones. The LinkedIn one is like kind of hard to follow, but like some of those like classic ones, I kind of just wanted to see like the structure. I'm sure that there are other better examples of ones that links we could probably share and like what needs to be included. And there's a couple of, maybe we have a list of these too, but like there's a couple of like investors that recently I've seen them post like pretty good Twitter threads that just like, this is what needs to be on it. Like, do not miss these slides kind of thing.
Yep.
Nice. No, that's good to hear.
+1.
Yes, I hear the Twitter. The Twitter is definitely popular. So it's good for our founders to kind of hear that. I agree. We have a lot of investors on Twitter, and it's a great way to kind of see who they are, what they're up to, and all the awesome resources they tend to share. So pivoting a little bit into the first pitch. So thinking about, best practices, what should a founder be applying in their first Zoom pitch? And just thinking about the specifics, what should they make sure? How should they set up their space? What does it look like, feel like as you're prepping? And we'll start with you, Amanda.
Yeah, so there's just like logistically, you got to make sure that your like video is clear, your lighting is good, your audio is good. Like first impressions are everything. So when those things turn on or aren't working, obviously people are really willing to be, flexible. And if your idea is good enough, like those things won't matter. But those are things that it's like, there's things in your control and things that are out, right? Like you don't know how the investor feels that day. You don't know if they're going to invest in you or not, but you can control what it looks like and feels like in the conversation with them. And so just that like very initial time. And then even just like clearing up your screen, like turning Slack off so you're not distracted, like closing tabs so that when you actually do share your screen, you're not like by accident sharing, tabs of their LinkedIn, or it's just clear it, or like pull the tabs you need out and like hide everything else. Just general like window management, like as you're about to do it. And so just knowing that like you likely have 30 minutes with them, it's not that long. You don't want to spend that long like presenting to them. You want to try to like really condense like an overview and then get to spend more of the time actually having a conversation with them and digging into some of their follow-up questions, which is why sending the deck early can be good because you can jump to that. But I think just really making sure to like make use of the 30 minutes and ask them questions too. Like talk, it's, you are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Like not every investor is like worth the checks that they write. Like that is just like a very much a truth. And some of them are worth far more than the checks they write. So really ask them the questions to figure out like, is this person going to help us build the business that we want?
Nice. Thank you for that. And Lisa, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen founders make on remote pitches, if any?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit more about suggestions. So I'd say one is, some small talk at the beginning is good just to like get to know each other. At the end of the day, like it is building a relationship. And so not too much time, like you don't want to waste 10 minutes of the time, but like just, where are you in the world these days? Everyone's lives are like upside down. And so just getting to know them a little bit more and, taking notes for your own records, and maybe there's something that you have in common that you can unsurface, and that might build accelerate the relationship building. So just a little bit of time for small talk at the beginning. I think next is like getting a sense of, do they want to spend time going through the deck? Did they go through the deck already, or should they do you want to make it more conversational, like Amanda said? And I think you want to ask that up front so that you can like follow their lead. Investors have different preferences for how they want to spend their time. Maybe they're, they didn't have a chance to go through the deck, and so they need it from the top. Others might have gone through the deck and know exactly what they want to ask you about. And so just get a sense of that. Also, body language doesn't really exist on Zoom. And so you can't really like read if someone's, trying to stop you and like ask a question. And so I'd say, check in every now and again and see, like, pause and to see if they have any questions, and maybe explicitly ask if they have any questions, just so that you're not talking the whole time without letting them get a word in, which can be, a little bit easier to tell when you're in person versus Zoom. I think towards the end of the call, you want to get a sense of how they're thinking about it and how you should think about them and your priorities. So, ask for feedback, say, what do you think of this space? Like, what are the biggest concerns you would have about investing in this space? Like, really, kind of trying to get more from them so that you can follow up. Like if they say, I'm really concerned about the competitive landscape here. I think there's just like too many players, or, I think Facebook's going to come in and do this and it's a feature, not a product. Like you can get a pulse on that. And then in the email, when you follow up, you can say, hey, I was thinking about what you said before. And like, here's why I think, we have a really good shot, or here's why I think like Facebook won't do this, or whatever the case is. You can kind of try to address some of those things in the follow-up, and then maybe, coming out of reading your reflection and how you're thinking about it, they might be more inclined to lean in. I think also just leaving a little bit of time to ask about their process so you can manage your pipeline and expectations. If you're trying to close around in a month and they take 2 months to do a diligence process, like maybe they're not a good fit at this time, and you can get a sense of, how you should think about them. Another thing is like, if they are not going to lead, you might want to, prioritize conversations with lead investors, because they're not going to come in until they know how the round is coming together anyway. And so I think just getting a better sense of like how you should think about them, what their process would look like, whether that works with your timeline. And then also, getting a sense of next steps. Like, are they leaning in or are they not? And if they're excited about it, they should be leaning in and kind of progressing the conversation sooner rather than later.
Nice. Thank you, Lisa. I think that's super helpful. And going back to that research, right? Talk to other investors, portfolio companies, kind of feel it out. So some of these things, and saving those time and that time. And the last piece about like pitching remotely, and to both of you, how do you communicate your value proposition? How do you project that confidence? And what does that look like throughout the fundraising process? Amanda, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of similar, obviously, like when you're in person, like Lisa was saying, like body language, and there's lots of things about being in person that are just better. But even being on Zoom, like the way you talk, how you're presenting yourself, how you're talking about your business, like those things wouldn't change whether you're online or in person. And so it's just like so important that you are able, like you know your business the best, and the case for it the best, and the vision for it. And so you really have to like pull people into that, and you're ultimately like willing this thing to life. And so getting them to be as excited as you are. And for me, that always meant like, I mean, one, like you got to just like show up as like your authentic self. And I know that it can be really difficult, especially in spaces like this. And I think I just was always very honest and transparent with people, and would be just like kind of open about myself, and that would help to build a relationship. And then as I'm explaining like what we've built and why, like really just talking through some of your whys, like why did you choose to do this versus this? Like, why is this part of the product the first thing on your roadmap versus this other thing? Like for us, for example, like we don't have a mobile app, we have a web app. For high school students, that's on the surface sounds completely counterintuitive. And for us, we just like had a lot of data that showed us that our students were actually using us on desktop. And so being able to show ways that you really understand this market, this problem, and like getting a chances to highlight that in the conversation is really, it's really powerful. Like it shows that like, what you're talking about. And you want to get to a place where even if the investor says no, that they're not saying no like I said, like because of anything in your control. They're saying no because they like that's just not going to fit in their thesis, right? That they're not going to that they're just not going to take a bet on this company for whatever reason. But that they still like really respect you and they really think you like pitched really well, kind of thing.
Nice. I don't know, Lisa, if there's anything you'd like to add there.
I haven't gone through the fundraising process per se myself, been involved in the fundraising for our fund, but I think just to kind of re-energize yourself, just keeping in check like your own energy going into these meetings. Sometimes it can be hard. You're getting a lot of no's. I would say like, don't take it personally. Investors speak to many founders throughout the year. They maybe make a handful of bets or investments. And, you know, a lot of the times it's not you, it's not like there's so many other factors to take into account. Sometimes they maybe are really, you know, interested in your idea, but they can't get it across the partnership for whatever reason. There's like, you know, biases against the business model, the industry, or it's just like a very high bar. And so I would just keep that in mind, just like how many investors you'll have to talk to and how many founders that they're talking to and what the ratio of like pitches versus investments. And, you know, if you're feeling low energy and just kind of like down because you're getting a lot of no's or because, you know, you're pitching a lot and don't feel like you're getting the traction that you want. One is like kind of being aware of that and talk to your team about it, talk to like your close group of advisors, just like keep your own energy in check because you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. And, you know, you have to take care of yourself in order to do that. So don't take it personally, but also like make sure that you have some sort of bench that you can go back to just like re-energize yourself about what you're working on and get that positive affirmation that you need to go back out there and, you know, potentially get some no's.
Well, one other thing I would add too is like you need to iterate on your deck after every pitch, because what you'll find is that you get the same questions over and over again, or if you see a pattern, that means that like you should answer that question in the deck or right in that like initial like pitch that you're making. Like the more you can preemptively answer their questions, the better. And that happens with practice. Like that's why that practice in the beginning is important. And then even after the very first pitch, the second, every day I made updates to my deck. So it almost didn't even look the same by the end as it did at the beginning.
Nice. I love that. I think it just speaks so much to the founder journey. Your first idea never ends up like, you know, we're at the last phase, and with every stage, I think it's always evolving. So now finishing up and wrapping up the first pitch, thinking about, you know, we alluded a little bit to this earlier, but for both of you, how should a founder approach next steps with an investor? Like, what are the specific questions they should be asking? Or what does that follow-up email look like?
So for me, I think the end of that first call, you're really trying to understand what their process is and what their next steps are. And you really want to try to minimize too many like unknowns, right? So if they may not give you too much like specifics, they might say, I'm going to take this to my team. And then, you know, you might say like, you know, is there someone else that we might want to loop in on this? Like someone else that might be making the decision, because oftentimes too, you're actually talking to an associate that's not going to make the decision at the end anyways. And so you really do need that intro to the partner. So you have to sort of figure out, am I talking to the decision maker? And then what is their decision process? So usually, like, you know, and I'm sure you can talk to this better than I can, but it seems like most investors have some day of the week where they meet with their people and discuss all the different deals that they've heard about. And so you can kind of figure out, they'll sometimes say like, I'm meeting with my team next Tuesday. And so then make a note of that. And then you'll want to send basically like 2 follow-ups, one that's sort of the right after the pitch. Like it's always good to send one the same day. That's just like, you know, really enjoyed our conversation. You can kind of like pull in something specific about the company or about the conversation you just had. Like really appreciated the advice you had on our go-to-market strategy, like whatever it might be, so that it like shows that you're looping in what they're saying. And then coming back to them, you know, if they said they were going to meet on Monday, then shoot an email on Tuesday and say like, hey, I know you guys met yesterday. Would love to hear some like follow-ups, and like really try to get on another call. It's sort of like what my goal always was, because I'm like, if I can chat with you again, if we can keep it going. But you also as the founder have to be really aware too of like when it's really not it's a no. Like these people are not going to invest, and you can just kind of tell. Like you don't want to give up too early. You really want to try to figure it out and get them to say now is not the right time. But you have to sort of you want to keep track of your list. And so what ends up happening is that you will have certain people who are kind of like in this bucket for you that are actually like still in your pipeline, and they're moving down your pipeline and getting closer to that, like that decision. And then understanding when someone is really not that interested, and making sure that you have enough people in the top of your funnel to like keep your entire process like going.
Nice, nice. Lisa, any thoughts on that?
I think that all makes sense, including a deck if you didn't send it before in the follow-up, and just say like, here's a copy of the deck, some bullet points that they can like share with their team, just, like make their work easy, so that they have like a summary of like what you do and like what the key points are, so that they can kind of pitch it to their team. And then to Amanda's point, like if there's any nugget that came from the conversation that's worth calling out, whether it's a piece of feedback that they gave you, maybe they mentioned they would make an introduction to someone, could be like a potential customer or potential, expert that they want to talk to and bring into the process. And then like answer any questions that you can that maybe came up during the call. So if they were like, hey, I think like, we'd really want to better understand like your, how your product roadmap looks, you can like, include that as part of your follow-up. So I think that there's, things that you can do on that front, to just like keep the conversation going, make it as easy for them as possible, and try to get a clear answer on what next steps are. I think, sometimes investors don't come out and say like a straight no, and can kind of like waste your time. So try to get to a clear sense of where they are as soon as possible, so you're not spending too much time on investors that might not be a good fit.
Nice. Thank you for that. And last question, and then we'll go to some Q&A. I see a lot of great questions coming in. But what do you both see as like 2 do's and don'ts after pitching an investor? And Lisa, we can start with you. Like, what are some things that you would highly recommend to do and don't?
Yep. So one, I would say, get a sense of who your potential leads are going to be if you're raising a priced round. And, I would say lean into those diligence requests more, because you need those lead investors, and the follow checks will come in after. And a lot of times they can benefit from the work that the lead investor does, because they're generally going to go deeper than a follow check would anyway. And then also, as you're getting closer to either a term sheet or making a decision on a term sheet, talk to founders that have worked with these investors before, so that you can, hear the feedback, call out any yellow flags, and have a discussion about it before actually signing the term sheet. On the don't side, I would say, don't rush. Like I see a lot of rounds coming together really quickly these days. And this is a long-term relationship, so you want to treat it as such, and kind of, have a strong foundation with your investors, and get to know one another during the process. And then the last thing is, don't assume the deal is done until the money hits the bank account, because these things fall through. I've seen it happen a lot of times, both for our portfolio companies and just deals that we've been involved in. It's never a sure thing until the money is in the bank. There's always something that could come up in between the yes and the wire, that might, cause a halt in the process. And so I'd say like, have visibility and clear next steps on getting that money in the bank, to make sure that it's like a sure thing.
Nice. Thanks. Amanda.
Don't start spending the money until you have the money in the bank either.
Great advice.
I would say also, I think some do's are just, really making sure that you are doing your due diligence on the investors. And that kind of comes towards the end of the process, like you're doing it every step of the way. You're understanding who the people are and trying to do some research into them. But before you even like accept their check and sign the term sheet, like really, as Lisa said, like reach out to other people they've invested in and get like reference calls on them. That has just been something that's like really important. And the other thing I think is just it's just like a constant grind. Like you have to sort of set the process and like set your own timeline for things, because things can really drag out. And I've been on both sides. Like my pre-seed round, like straight up took me like 9 months to raise, and it was long, and I had people completely fall through in the middle, and I for many times thought we're not going to make it. And I think one of the mistakes I made in that process was sort of like trying to raising because you're running out of money. Like it really hurts you in the long run anyways, because you end up rushing, and because you become more desperate. You don't have as many like you just don't have as much power in that process. And so I found that like, it was a lot easier when I raised when I didn't need it. And that's really hard in the early stage, because like what else are you going to do kind of thing. And so I get that. But I think the more that you can kind of own your process and even like carve out the dates and times in which you're like, this is when I'm going to close this round that week, and then kind of backwards planning into that to like make sure that you can get there, and that's the date you can set, because that kind of urgency is also like necessary for the investors too. Like it really helps get things moving when you're like, it's happening, this is the round's closing. Super helpful. The don'ts, I guess I already listed maybe those ones, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just like, you just have to kind of put yourself out there and just, I mean, don't get like discouraged is like the best thing. Like I have probably pitched Fiveable in total, probably like 300-400 times. Like that's a lot of pitching. It's a lot of times in front of people. There have been some terrible experiences and some great experiences. And I think it's just really trying to center yourself around like what you're building and why you're building it. And knowing that like most investors don't know what it is that you're onto, right? That's the point. And like you could see even last week as like Airbnb and DoorDash IPO'd, like there were plenty of investors saying how they missed out on those businesses, why they thought when those businesses were pre-seed, seed stage, that they were like, that's never going to work. I'm not going to put 25,000 into Airbnb. And now they're kicking themselves. So like, I think that happens. Investors make plenty of mistakes too. So even if someone passes on you, and it just is a matter of like, prove them wrong, like keep building, find people who will back you, and like just keep pushing forward. And you want that investor someday to be like, man, why didn't I get in on that round?
I love that. I love that insight. So I see a couple of questions. We'll try to get through as many as possible, but I see one from Viviana. Curious on when to reach out to investors. I hear fundraising is relationship building. How do I start building it when we may not be ready, but we want to start the connection? And either or.
Yeah. I think that you can start building a relationship either like if you're going through an accelerator, for example, there's office hours, there's, investors come in to kind of do practice pitching. You can kind of start tracking people there and following up with them. I'd say, what the call out Amanda had that I thought was great was just around keeping people posted and having an investor update like mailing list. And there's maybe a version that you have for existing investors, if you have like angel investors, et cetera. And then maybe that's information that you want to keep a little bit closer. And then you have a version that goes out more broadly. And that can go to like, the group of investors that you meet along the way. And I think it serves two purposes. One is to kind of keep you top of mind for people, and people can reach out and engage when they think it's potentially a fit. But the second part is like creating the discipline of like reporting, which is important, especially when you have investors on board. And you want to keep that practice going even after you raise the round, because it's good to keep investors in the loop on what's going on with the business so that they can help out. They can, make connections if there's like ways that you're looking for your investors to, help you recruit or help you, meet other investors, et cetera. So I'd say like generally investor reporting and communication and keeping that going is a good way of like both building relationships, but also building trust.
Nice. Thank you for that. And then there's a lot of questions around accelerators. So I think, Amanda, this one's for you. What process did you go through to pick an accelerator? And why did you go with the ones you did?
The correct answer to this is it's the same process as with an investor. There are a lot of different accelerators. It's not just YC. There's a lot of them. And there's some that are totally remote. They're in all over across the world even. And so they're really finding accelerators that focus on your industry, your sector, your stage, and that can truly be helpful for you. If it's in a market you want to tap into, or they have an experience of building, that kind of company. For me, it was a little bit less like thoughtful and a little bit more like we needed to do something. We were trying to stay alive. And so applying for different opportunities, and then what felt like a lot of luck and just like right timing. But I think in general, I think an accelerator can honestly be a really good option for especially pre-seed companies, because they will open up a lot of doors for you and really help you to get from the square one to like the next one. And so I wouldn't necessarily like write any of them off. For me, they've been really helpful. You still have to be careful with them too. Like there are accelerators too that are, again, like not helpful, that really do take advantage of founders, but there's a lot that are really great. And one place you can go to look at for them is like F6S, which is a site where they will post. A lot of times the applications themselves happen right on that site, and so you can apply for different cohorts, and sometimes depends on which ones they are, but sometimes some of them are equity based and some of them are not. Some of them will do other types of programs that don't give money or require equity.
Nice. And then for either of you, how do you calculate how much money you would need? And I think this is like when you're building that stage. And I think there's both perspectives here. Either or can take it.
I'll take the first shot. So first, it's going to be a range. It's like you might have some flexibility built in, and like maybe an investor would be excited to do a $1.5 million round and not a $3 million round, or maybe they think like you're in a position where you should do a $3 million round and not a 1.5. So like I'd say first is you build kind of the financial model with like, if we raise a $1.5 million round, it'll get us 18 months. We can hire XYZ people, and then we'll be at, $1 million ARR in a year. Like that's one path. Or if we raise 3 million, we think we can be at 2 million ARR in a year. And like the reason why is because we can hire like this additional sales person or, this channel partnership person. And so I think one is like building in flexibility. Two is understanding those different scenarios and where they can get you. And then, when you're talking to investors, getting a sense of where they think, both where they think you are, and then also where they think the market opportunity is. Like there might be urgency for some reason to like go to the market quick because there's other people that are coming into the space. Or it might be a situation where, you are still building out the product and you're not quite ready to put the, pedal to the metal and like really go aggressive on customer introductions. And so maybe a $1.5 million round makes sense. And then you can raise a larger seed in 12, 18 months at a higher valuation and have more points on the board at that point. So I'd say, yeah, like have flexibility. It's a conversation, it's a negotiation, and kind of play out the different scenarios of where the money can get you.
Nice. And Amanda, I know we're almost at time, but any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple thoughts. One, like everything is more expensive than you think it is, and it goes fast. And so just really planning out. And I think also like getting to that, doing that math almost like without revenue, like just figure out your like cash projections can really be helpful too, because you don't want to, there's a lot of assumptions that are going to go into your model. And of course you want to project out revenue, but to really be able to say like, just don't assume any revenue. Like, what does $1 million actually get us? What does $2 million get us? And figuring out like, the burn rate of how much you'll spend per month and the runway of how many months you have to last. And just kind of asking yourself the question of like, to get to the next stage, what is the metric that I need to be at? And then how much money do I need to get us there?
Nice. Well, thank you both for all of those gems. This is, it's been great. I've been watching the chat. Everyone's been enjoying it. I know we had a few more questions, but really appreciate both of your time. Latinas in Tech, it's been great. Caro, I see you like with the key learnings. Thank you so much. Really captivating everything that both Amanda and Lisa have been sharing with the audience. So thank you again to both of you, the work that you're doing and just sharing your journeys and advice. And it was really great to get that investor perspective and the founder perspective. I think that full circle is always, really appreciated, especially as founders are grinding away and doing what they need to do. So with that, thank you again. It was such a pleasure to be in your presence and to be with our audience members. And yeah, happy holidays. And I wish you all the best in the coming year.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye, Caro. Thank you. Bye, Anna.